My cheating wife had an affair for 20 years. I raised the child her lover fathered, sued her, got revenge, and, sneaky as a fox, finally took over the house. Now someone is on the phone, better not be one of those annoying sales calls or robocalls, someone is about to get yelled at. It's about 8 p.m. on a Wednesday night. It was about 8 p.m. on a Wednesday night, and my wife, Tracy, usually works late on Wednesdays, so I always plan for an interesting night or a relaxing night. Tonight was a cold night, and I had already spent the evening at home. I had already finished eating a medium meat pizza from Papa John's and a few beers earlier, and then sat down to watch the Cubs game with a couple of Corona beers. I still had 2 bottles in the fridge and 6 more in the kitchen fridge. It was going to be a good night. Tracy would come in around 10, take a shower and freshen up, and then we'd snuggle around 11. Wednesday is always low-key at the end Dales, but this phone call was like a punch in the stomach to my good mood. I had a bad feeling about it, but as a responsible person, I answered the phone. It turned out to be a call from Chelsea, the wife of Tracy's boss, Jack. The boss's wife, she sounded close to breaking down, and it turned out that Jack had a heart attack at work. My wife Tracy called him, and they rushed him to the hospital in an emergency, and the situation is very bad. Tracy got in the ambulance with Jack and needs someone to drive her home, as Chelsea intends to stay with Jack until he needs her. I reassured her that I was already on my way and wished Jack all the best. Jack has been Tracy's boss for 22 years. She started working for him after graduating from university in a software company and gradually grew into his right-hand man, so to speak, his work partner. I started dating Tracy when she was working for Jack, and over the years our families have often done things together. He has always been a good person, and Tracy says he is an amazing boss who takes good care of her, including with regard to salary. Jack is French, 55 years old, and 10 years older than Tracy and me. He is a good-looking man, with a well-kept figure and a good physique for his age. He has a lively personality and attracts attention wherever he goes. Men and women alike were attracted to him, even though everyone knows that everyone has their own destiny and no matter how well they take care of themselves. I was surprised when Jacques had a heart attack. I parked in the visitor parking lot near the emergency room and went in to ask about Jacques. I told them that I was the husband of the woman who had come with him and that I was looking for her. As I said this, I noticed to my right a pair of emergency medical personnel, one of whom quietly tapped the forearm of the other and whispered something just loud enough for me to hear. Coward was here, wondering what this would be like, and although he seemed to be talking about me, I had no idea what he meant. I didn't know what a coward was. I was concerned, all I wanted was to find Tracy. 5 minutes later, Tracy and her husband came out of the room, tears streaming down their faces. They had found me and came over to give me a hug. Rick, Tracy said. Her voice broke as we hugged. A few minutes earlier, the doctor had said he had died of a severe heart attack. I was speechless, and the 3 of us stood in the hallway, hugging tightly. Both women were crying uncontrollably. Shell, from France, and Jacques had been married for 35 years. They had married when they were 20 and moved to the United States after Jacques got a job with a U.S. software company. They had a daughter, Amy, in the early days of the computer age, who was 3 years older than my daughter Allison. Allison was 18. The girls looked so much alike that some people mistook them for sisters. Jacques doted on Amy, and I know that this was especially hard for her. Just then, an emergency worker came up to me and asked if I was Tracy's husband. After I confirmed it, he handed me Tracy's purse, saying that she had left it in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. I took the purse in my left hand, shook his hand in thanks with my right, and then began adjusting the dangling straps to keep it secure. I could see what looked like a bra stuffed inside, which made no sense to me, so I looked closer and sure enough, there was a bra stuffed inside the wallet. It was all so confusing, and I didn't really get a good look at it when the woman came out of the room crying. Trickery. I noticed she wasn't wearing a bra, which made me feel really strange. I don't know how long we were at the hospital with Shell until she decided it was time to go. Amy was due back from college in the morning, and Shell wanted to get some rest. I drove Shell home, and took Tracy and myself to our house. I thought I could help them get their cars tomorrow. Shell's was parked in the emergency room parking lot and Tracy's was in the lot at work. Tracy didn't say a word when she came in, she went straight to the master bathroom to shower. About 20 minutes later she came into the family room, her eyes were red and puffy, obviously she had been crying. She sat on the couch and I left the recliner and sat next to her, hugging her tightly. She was breathing heavily, and I could feel her body trembling from crying. I wanted to ask her why she wasn't wearing a bra, especially since she was supposed to be working with Jackie, but I didn't have the courage to bring it up tonight. Instead, I held her quietly for another 20 minutes, until she said she was tired and wanted to go to bed, since it was already midnight. I decided to sleep with her the next morning. After showering and shaving, I called in sick and suggested taking Tracy to her office to pick up her car, but she seemed shocked, started stammering, then took a moment to catch her breath, calmed down, and instead asked me to take her to Shell's house, where they planned to take a taxi to the office to pick up some of Jacques' belongings, and then Tracy would drive Shell to the hospital to process the paperwork and pick up Jacques' personal effects. I offered to help, but was quickly rejected. Actually, this arrangement was quite good for me, as I needed to find the emergency personnel who had dealt with the emergency last night and answer a few questions. After dropping Tracy off at Cher's place and getting an update on her situation, I jumped back in the car and headed straight for the hospital. I quickly found the names of the emergency personnel who had dealt with the emergency and located their location. I followed the instructions and found the target at the fire station, and they remembered me from the night before. I looked at the man who handed me Tracy's wallet. His name tag said Gage. I asked him directly where the emergency had started. Ed, this is the second time in a short time someone has stuttered their answer to me. What do you mean? He asked suddenly, suspicious. My wife and Jack were supposed to be at work, but you didn't pick them up at Saul's, did you? Is that why you called me a coward? Oh, man, I'm not taking it personally. He raised his voice, saying, it's just that we ran this a few times, and we realized that the people who checked into the rooms weren't actually married, and we'd get blamed if something went wrong. Don't blame the messenger, just relax, Gage. I'm not trying to blame you, I just want to know the truth. I looked up the word coward, and the results weren't encouraging, but it's not your fault. If you had told me you were picking them up somewhere other than Thor, then this would have been my problem. We left from the West End Hotel. The year-old replied that they had walked for about 15 minutes when the guy suddenly grabbed his chest and collapsed on your wife. She had to push him away to get to the phone. Meanwhile, she had given him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, otherwise he would have almost died. I got the truth I wanted when we got him to the emergency room. I thanked them both and left. As I walked away, I could feel their pity and their stares. As I drove home, my mind was racing. When I got home, Tracy was with Jacques, who had had a heart attack and almost died. How long had this been going on? I wondered then, and then it hit me like a lightning bolt. Our daughter Allison and their daughter Amy weren't just coincidentally similar, they were sisters. Tracy had been with him for at least 19 years. How had I been so blind? What a trusting fool I was. Tracy and Jacques often worked late, sometimes more than once a week. Then there were the occasional girls' nights out or staff parties. Could she have been cheating on him on those days? What about when they went on business trips together? How could she not have known? I admit I can be a bit thick sometimes, but how could she have been so blind, especially as they both looked so similar? Cher was always involved in the business Tracy mentioned. Cher would drop by at any time, just to see her husband or her. I thought they were close friends, it seemed that way. How could Tracy betray Cher like this? Tracy's car was parked in the garage, and when I returned home, she was sitting in the family room drinking wine. When I walked in, my expression must have betrayed my emotions, because she immediately sensed something was wrong. What's wrong, honey? She asked. Although I wanted to remain calm, anger took over, and I couldn't help but ask, how long have you been having an affair with Jack? I raised my voice full of venom. Tracy Ellison's father, right? Tracy put down her glass and jumped up from the sofa. Jumping up from the sofa, she shouted, how can you say such horrible things to me? She almost screamed at me. She stopped a foot away, her eyes darting at me like darts. If looks could kill, I would have died long ago. I did not flinch. I knew I was right. I stood my ground and stared her in the eye. However, I lowered my voice and whispered, you can call me to death, but you dare to lie to me and say I'm wrong. If you lie to me, I will knock your teeth out and they will fall out of your throat. In our 20 years of marriage, and even before our relationship was established, I had never cursed my wife or threatened her. To say that she was shocked is an understatement. Her mouth opened wide as if she were going to respond, but then she seemed to realize that I was serious and the lie got stuck in her throat. She took a step back, perhaps because the fire in my eyes told her that he is dead because of you. She sat back down on the sofa, not even bothering to mop up the wine that had spilled on the carpet. The stress of the deception, combined with the physical exertion, must have been too much for his heart. Considering the amount of time you two spent sleeping together, I'm surprised it didn't happen sooner. I could tell from the shocked expression on her face that I had hit a nerve. She looked down at her hands. Ed felt like it had been minutes, but it was probably only about 10 seconds. God, do you really think I killed him? She asked softly. I don't know if Sherry felt the same way. Why would Sherry feel that way? How could she feel that way unless she knew about you too? She knew from the beginning and approved of it, Tracy said softly. Sometimes she even joined us, especially on business trips. She always thought I should enjoy my time with Jack, after all I run his business, and she was happy that I took care of him at the office while she took care of him at home. I felt my head spinning, I felt confused and disoriented. I sat down to steady myself, so I was the only one left in the dark. Everyone else knew what Allison knew. Allison has known for the past 4 years and she understands. Oh my God, Allison knows and understands, this is so confusing. I exclaimed, but that wasn't what I meant. Does Shell know that Allison is Jack's daughter? Shell knows and she doesn't care. Even Amy knows. I hope you're all having a good laugh at my expense. Even my own daughter knows and won't tell me. This is great. I shouted. I stormed out of the house. I ended up driving to the nearby park and sat there for hours. Tracy called me a few times, but I didn't answer and let them go to voicemail. I just sat and thought. I always thought I was clever, but when it came to Tracy, I was completely helpless. I never thought she might cheat on me. I trusted her so much that I may have missed the obvious signs for at least 19 years. I felt stupid and wondered if there was someone else besides Jacques. My mind was racing with thoughts. As it got dark, I left the park and drove home from the garage into the house. I saw that there was a small light on in the kitchen and Tracy was sitting at her usual place at the table with a cup of tea in front of her. She offered me a cup, but I refused and went to the wine cabinet to get a stronger drink. I poured myself a scotch and sat down opposite her. I couldn't even begin to tell you how sorry I am for hurting you. Tracy looked down at her hands and said softly, I need to know everything now. I said firmly, you have to explain how you could do this to me and claim to love me. You have to tell me if you really loved me and respected me. You should never doubt my love for you. Tracy said eagerly, I have always loved you and still do. It's just that I also love love. Some people think you can only love one person at a time, but I know that's not true because I love someone else too. Don't beat around the bush, just get to the point, I said firmly. Tracy was at the company was founded in the autumn. At the time, the company was about a year old. Like many small companies, the few employees had multiple responsibilities, worked long hours and grew closer and closer. It was an exciting time for her. I remember her confiding in me about the difficulties we encountered on our dates. She joined the company about a year after we started dating, and as the company grew, she became Jack's right-hand woman. You could say that he was the driving force behind the company, while she took care of the organization. She juggled multiple tasks, Jack saw her as his equal, and Tracy and I warmed to each other outside the office, while her relationship with Jacques grew closer and closer at work. It seemed that her personal and professional lives went hand in hand. Tracy explained that although she and Jack maintained a professional demeanor in front of their colleagues, the two of them were even closer when they were alone. They talked about everything, from trivial matters to profound topics, from sex to politics. Tracy, 24, is beautiful, with a sporty figure and long blonde hair, and Jack, 34, is fit, with long brown wavy hair, a charming smile and good manners, so when they ended their long day and had sex for the first time on the old sofa in his office, it felt so natural. Tracy recalls Tracy says it felt so right that even a year later, when we got married, she didn't feel guilty about being with both me and Jacques. It wasn't just physical attraction, but a deep emotional connection with, but she knew. She couldn't tell me because she knew how strongly I felt about cheating. She loved us both and didn't want to lose either of us, and I was kept in the dark. About 2 months later, when Jack and Tracy realized their relationship was going to be long-term, he wanted to be honest with his wife, who had just given birth to their first child. Jack told Shell that she and their daughter Amy would always be his first priority, but that he also wanted to set aside a part of his heart for Tracy. Shell then invited Tracy to spend a weekend with Jack. I remember Tracy leaving for the weekend, pretending to visit her sick mother. After that weekend, Shell agreed to the affair. A few years later, Tracy became pregnant. Shell comforts her and decides the story. If the children are athletes, because I am related to athletes, this part is easy. And because I rarely spend time alone with them, if anyone notices the similarities between them, Shell or Tracy will joke that it's just a coincidence, and if I think too much about it, they may suspect something. Shell treats Tracy like a sister and is proud of Jock's little family. Tracy mentioned that in Tracy's revelation, or in her recollection, I had nothing to say, because she had no remorse for what she had done. She was just recalling those things. She spoke, expecting a response from me. The only thing I could think of was to ask her if she had separated from Jack when we first got married and had sex almost every day. She looked embarrassed, glanced away, and then admitted that they hadn't. That was the most exciting moment of my life. She said I had two handsome men who loved and desired me, and that I was always very hungry. She said that when Jack and I made love, I always made sure to myself, just in case we were too hasty in our lovemaking, and sometimes you did rush things, but I tried to minimize that, and that after I made love to Jacques, I never let you suck me off, which was very considerate of you. I muttered, and it was interesting that over all these years I had never really compared the sex you two had. She continued, you were both good lovers, kind and considerate, and about the same size. It wasn't better with Jacques, it was just that, well, because of who you were, I have to admit, I felt a little relieved to know it wasn't a physical relationship with a stranger, but at the same time, she admitted she loved both of us, which stung. I was raised to be faithful to one person, to our soul mate, and even though I may be the closest to her, there is another person with whom I share this intimacy. Tracy sat down, took a sip of tea, and looked me in the eye as if she were searching for an answer. I didn't answer her unspoken question, and I didn't say anything wise. I set the cup down, left it in the sink, and went upstairs to bed. I don't know why, but I know I won't be able to sleep that night. After 5 minutes, Tracy comes to my bed and snuggles up behind me. I pretend to be asleep so I don't have to say goodnight. I get up at 5 a.m. as usual. I do my morning routine as usual and then go to work. Tracy is still in bed when I leave, and it seems she's not going to work either. I guess she and Shell need to figure out what to do next after Jack leaves. Obviously, I had my own problems to deal with. When life gets tough, I like to think that work can always be a safe haven. I was vice president of sales at Mayon Pharmaceuticals, and despite being 45 and a relative newcomer to the industry, my expertise was in chemistry, so unlike many salespeople, I really understood how products were made and what they did. I even helped develop one product, a blockbuster called Catol, which reduced female libido, and I made a lot of money from it. My salary was also very good, and together with Tracy's salary, we lived a very comfortable life. A fashionable neighborhood, 2 beautiful cars, wonderful vacations, we would not be financially hurt when we divorced. Divorce is terrible, and until that moment I had never really considered it, but when I found out that Tracy had cheated on me, divorce seemed inevitable. Allison was at university, and apart from the pain Tracy had caused me, there seemed to be nothing to keep us together. Breaking up should not be a big deal. My boss, Arnold Kramer, and I have been colleagues for 18 years. We met at an industry conference after I had worked as a chemical technician for another pharmaceutical company for 5 years. We hit it off immediately, and he suggested that I try sales, and then offered me a job at his company. I decided to take the challenge. Arnold was spot on in his assessment of my abilities, and it has paid off for both of us. Not only are we a great team at work, but he is also a wonderful friend. We have developed a deep friendship that I hope will last a lifetime. He has been married to his wife, Lauren, for about 30 years and has 2 adult children and 5 grandchildren. At 52, he is full of energy and quick-witted, not only intelligent himself but also bold enough to surround himself with people as smart as me. I think he must have been shocked when I told him Tracy had cheated on him and that I wanted a divorce. He asked if I was sure she had cheated, and I confirmed it. He didn't press for details, and I didn't offer any. We agreed to talk more later, and he understood. However, he pulled a business card out of his card holder, which read Mayon's attorney of record. Ari is very loyal to those who have contributed to him, and he trusts the team at Mayon, especially their small department that specializes in divorces for people in better financial situations. He suggested it to me, but I assured him it would only take a few hours, because after all it was a simple case, we were living in a no-fault marriage, we both wanted to be responsible for Allison, and we both had our own pension plans that we could keep or divide the proceeds of the house. When I got home from work that evening, everything was in disarray. Tracy had already prepared dinner, my favorite, supreme pasta, and she had opened a bottle of Merlot. Everything looked so good that I didn't have the courage to remind her that Jack was the wine expert. I prefer something stronger. I guess it's hard to keep everything in order when you have two loves at the same time. Tracy was her usual chatty self during dinner, acting as if nothing had changed between us. I waited about 10 minutes before I finally blurted out the dreaded 4 words, "We need to talk." "No, we don't." She practically yelled at me. I have to admit, I was shocked by her reaction and tone. I had her on the ropes. She had admitted to having a decades-long affair with her boss. She knew how I felt about cheating. How could she think I would stay with her? I hoped we could at least talk like civilized people before I sent you away. I said as calmly as I could, "You can send me away, I don't care. I'm not divorcing you." She said in a slightly irritated tone, "The bottom line is, love me, I love you, I won't let you go. I will fight you to the end. You are so stupid, you will ruin the best thing you have ever had, just because your pride is hurt." I was just starting to respond, but she interrupted me before I could finish. "Not until you found out about me and Jarkhan. Have I ever given you reason to doubt my love for you? Have I ever been unkind to you? In any case, you always got the sex you wanted. I made sure to take care of you in every way, physically, mentally and emotionally. Weren't we each other's best friends? If you hadn't discovered it by chance, you would have loved me until the end of your days. You'll never know if we could have gone back to the way things were. No. Because I did discover it, and you didn't love me as much as you said you did. Otherwise, you wouldn't have given your body and soul to another man. You knew it was wrong, which is why you kept it from me. I don't think 20 years of cheating is love. You've had sex with another man for 20 years, but you admit to loving him. You're intimate with him in the same way you're intimate with me. How can you love me? If you can, forget about sex for a while. Can't you see that all the love you give him is taken from me? My love for the two of you is enough. You too, Tracy yelled at me, "He's a man and should be able to understand, but I knew you wouldn't, so I never told you, and now you're proving me right. I'm not man enough because I won't let you have a sex partner and a prospective husband on the side. It's ridiculous. I'm not stupid enough to allow you to do this to me willingly, so you made the choice yourself, completely for yourself. This is all you wanted, you got it. Believe me, if I hadn't found out, I would have kept thinking everything was perfect, and become the biggest fool in the world. You can put it on my damn tombstone, here lies Rick Avondale, the happiest fool in the world, who thought life was wonderful because he didn't know that his wife had 2 husbands. The viewing and funeral were 3 days later on Monday. I didn't go. I got up like any other morning and went to work. When I got home, Tracy and Allison were still in the kitchen, dressed in their funeral clothes. I walked over to my daughters, who had just returned from college for the funeral. I tried to hug them, but I couldn't. At first they avoided my touch, then turned their backs on me and walked away quietly, crying. Tracy put a hand on my arm and shook her head gently. Normally I take the hint and leave it at that, but these were no longer normal circumstances. I growled under my breath. I went upstairs to the bedroom, packed a few days' worth of clothes, grabbed my toothbrush and toiletries, and left. Tracy started calling me almost as soon as I left, and I ignored all the calls, letting them go to voicemail. I have to admit one thing, even though she didn't pretend everything would be okay like her mother did, she decided that I was the bad guy in this situation. She wanted to make me pay. If she wanted to break my heart, she could make me pay, and she did. Not only was she not my biological daughter, she made it clear that she was no longer my child, emotionally speaking. The situation was getting worse by the minute. On Tuesday, I took the day off work and went to the bank to split all our accounts into hers and mine. I closed our joint credit card, opened a new one in just my name, and made an appointment with the lawyer Ali had recommended. He arranged for me to go to the lawyer on Thursday. I hadn't slept for 3 days, and it was interesting to go to the lawyer on Thursday, whose name, incidentally, was Mike Squirm. I hoped he was better at being a lawyer than his name suggested. To be honest, I didn't think there would be much to talk about. I told him all the details of the affair and said I wanted to get my share of the estate as soon as possible. I also insisted on suing Jock's estate for child support and demanded a child report, because if she was no longer my child, then her real father should step forward. I didn't want to be taken advantage of anymore. I told Mike that Mike had no problem with my plan, but he warned that if Tracy refused to divorce, the judge might order the parties to counseling, which would delay things. I told him to go ahead anyway. Then, the following Monday, Tracy filed the papers on the sofa. I assume it was 10:07 a.m., because at 10:08 a.m., our receptionist said, "Angry Tracy is on the line." I hadn't answered Tracy's calls or texts all week, and I had instructed the staff at Mayon to forward her calls directly to my voicemail, which they did. But I knew I couldn't hide from her forever, so I asked Marlene, our front desk supervisor, to forward her calls directly to me. "You're unbelievable," she said, and I hung up as soon as she finished her first expletive. 15 seconds later, the second call came. "Don't hang up." I hung up again, thinking about how long it would take her to realize that if she wanted to talk to me, she would have to be civil. The third call took a while to connect, and when I picked it up, she was practically whispering, trying to control her temper. "You win, round 1. We need to talk." "That would be great," she said. I answered as cheerfully as I could, and told her to call my lawyer, Mike, and set up a meeting. "You may want to bring your own lawyer, it will speed things up." The appointment was set for 2 weeks from now, and until then I stayed at a nearby motel, occasionally going to my old house to mow the lawn, collect the mail and retrieve my other things. The first time Tracy saw me arrive home, she tried to greet me like the long-lost husband she had become and started to hug me in the driveway. I pushed her away hard and walked into the house. "You don't need to be there, in the driveway, you don't need to lay our problems bare and ask me if our love is really so insignificant to you. No, it is precisely because our love is so important to me that we must end this marriage." I replied, "You already have my heart completely and cheated me into getting it. How could I not consider this a complete betrayal of trust, which is the foundation of marriage? You knew what you were doing was wrong, but you betrayed my trust to get what you wanted, both physically and emotionally." But he knew and accepted it, while I was deceived. The deception. "It's not my fault that we got divorced, it's your selfishness and betrayal. I couldn't bear the thought of sharing your body with another man, but sharing your love with someone else is even worse. It hurts me more than if you cheated on me with someone you loved. The fact that he slept with him and even had his child just because I didn't know doesn't make it right. You both took something from me. It was a good thing he died of a heart attack that day, because if he hadn't, I would have shot him." Tracy gasped as she heard me say this, and I was already in tears. "You know, in all this, you've never said you were sorry for cheating on me." I continued, "You apologized for hurting me, and I know you're sorry for being caught, but I don't think you're sorry at all for what you did. Rick, I know we can work this out, please don't divorce." She pleaded with us, "This is our marriage, Tracy, there was never supposed to be a you or a me, just us, or forever." Mike glanced at Tracy's lawyer and said, "I think we're done here, your client needs to sign the papers and return them to us." Tracy's lawyer was a serious middle-aged African-American woman. She nodded solemnly and held out her hand for Mike to shake. Over the next 2 weeks, some of the finer details were sorted out, and about 3 months later, we were officially divorced. 2 days after the divorce was finalized, I asked Mike to sue Jack's estate for child support and college expenses. Although the legal jargon sounded more complicated, I probably wouldn't have taken this step if it weren't for Allison's clear indication after the funeral that she didn't want to have anything to do with me anymore. I raised that child for 18 years as if she were my own flesh and blood, and that was the respect she showed me. But I think she let it slip to Tracy that in her eyes I was no better than a fool, and 14 years of sincere fatherly love went down the drain. So when Mike suggested that we make up for lost respect with real money, I wasn't offended at all, precisely $1 million. I appreciated Mike's attitude. I expected Shell to call when the summons was served, but I didn't expect it to be Tracy. Shell probably thought Tracy would get the message across better, but she guessed wrong. "Is this another way of getting back at me? Are you short of money?" Tracy said, when I answered, "Hello, Mrs. Armandale, I'm glad you called. I'm not sure why you're calling, but you do know it makes you look like a complete jerk." She commented, "You do know that I raised another man's child for 18 years while you and your colleagues made fun of me, and now that man's child thinks I'm just a fool. I don't care what you think." I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. I guess Tracy told Shell about my position and my stubbornness to Shell, when I was sure I was right, so when her lawyer tried to negotiate with Mike, she wrote me a check for $1 million. A few months later, it turned out that Shell could easily afford the money, because she sold Soul to a Japanese company for $8 million. Jack no longer ran the business. Things could have been a wise business move, and the story could have ended there, but as the old newsman Paul Harvey used to say the story continues. 2 days after the sale of Soful, $2 million was deposited in my account in the Cayman Islands, my finder's fee for the purchase of Soful by Nakafuji Company Limited. Within 9 months of an anonymous Nakafuji lawyer and I signing an agreement, no matter what happened, no matter what role I played, if Nakafuji had purchased Soful by a certain date, then I would receive an introduction fee after that date. The deal fell through, so now you may be wondering what role I played in the Sofar deal. It's a bit complicated, but the main points are as follows. I wasn't entirely honest with you in the first half of this story. Most of what I told you was true, but some of it was based on what I could have won an Oscar for. And while I may have seemed completely clueless, let me explain. About a month before Jock died, I really was completely clueless. At that time, a lawyer from the Nakafuji building approached me, hoping that I could help and facilitate a deal with Jack. Why would you need my help? I asked naively, except that my wife worked closely with Jack. As we know you're a smart guy, we think you'll accept the challenge. Payday. Let's cheat on you for years. The lawyer said. I was shocked. That's an understatement. Tracy was cheating on me, and this guy from Japan knew about it. You've got to be kidding me. As it turned out, Nakata had been researching several companies, and when these people do research, they don't leave any details out. They easily discovered the affair between Jackie and Tracy, and the involvement of Cher and the 2 daughters. They were right to think that way, which made me more willing to help them, but it had to be done quickly because they were considering other software companies and I had to deliver within 9 months. First, they showed me evidence of Tracy's infidelity, photos, videos, phone records, travel receipts. I had everything I needed to expose them. Then they made a more tempting deal. My financial situation was stable, so I didn't necessarily need the money, but they offered me $1 million to help me leave the company. At that point, I would have helped them for free, but I didn't want to admit that. I just needed to plan my strategy to make sure the money would be in my hands after the divorce, so I wouldn't have to split it, because we live in a no-fault state, but first I had to calm down so as not to expose myself. My initial reaction was to wait for their next appointment and then shoot them both, but spending the rest of my life as Bubba's cellmate didn't appeal to me. I had to stay calm and act like I knew nothing. I'd been doing this for 20 years, what was a little more time? I told L. Tracy and Choke what had happened, but not how I had found out. Late one night, we were sitting in the factory, talking freely, drinking a bottle of Don Julio tequila. Don had drunk about half the bottle and was looking at me seriously when he said, "Damn, son, this is messed up. The guy who invented crazy is screwing his wife with another man, and you should give her some of that shit." Rick, it was then that I realized that although I hadn't mentioned it to M for obvious reasons, I still thought I should give him a drink of the stuff. Hey, wait a minute, kill 2 birds with 1 stone. One of the benefits of insanity is that it doesn't have many side effects unlike most big drugs. In fact, there is only one side effect, and if taken correctly, men shouldn't take it at all because while it suppresses the female libido, it can cause blood pressure to spike and trigger a fatal heart attack. I just need to get some pills into Jack's hands. Jack and I belong to the same golf club and we play occasionally with 2 other guys. I've arranged for us to play as a foursome next Saturday, with lunch in the restaurant after the first 9 holes. We played well on the first 9, and we had about 20 minutes for lunch and drinks, followed by a second tea break. You have to remember that I'm quite a good salesman, so while we were sitting there eating and drinking, I casually glanced over at Jock and said, "Hey, man, how are you doing? You look a little tired." The other 2 people were about 10 years younger than Jock, and he knew it, so this question made him a little embarrassed. When I suggested that we delay the next tea break for 30 minutes so that he could get some rest, he replied that it wasn't necessary and that he was just a little tired, but there was no need to change anything for me. Actually, I don't think he's tired at all, but now I'm taking advantage of his insecurity as the oldest person on the team. I pull out a small baggie containing unmarked white pills from my left front pants pocket. I take a pill every day at lunch that helps me get through the rest of the day with ease. I hand Jack the baggie containing 5 pills and tell him to take one over the next few days, and if you like it, I'll get you some more next time we play. Jack takes one out of the bag, puts it in his mouth and downs it with a chilled bourbon. He slaps his chest like Tarzan and shouts, "I feel full of power, boys." And indeed, within minutes, he may actually feel euphoric. Elevated blood pressure can be euphoric, which is why athletes get excited before a game. But for those wondering why I gave him a little bag instead of a pill bottle or pillbox, it's too much of a good thing. Here's why: I want him to throw the little bag away after he takes the pills, not keep it on his person. That way, if someone goes through his clothes, they won't find it in his pocket. If someone goes through his clothes when he has an accident on Wednesday night, those concerned will find that the 5 pills will last until Wednesday, which is usually Jack Tracy's date night. The man's blood pressure was already elevated after his romantic encounter with the non-wife woman, and with the effect of the medication, his blood pressure further increased and peaked, which was the trigger for the heart attack, which could be fatal. But since the heart attack looked like an ordinary heart attack, and we live in a small city, there was no further investigation unless there were suspicious or unusual circumstances. So I made sure to play the role of the betrayed husband as well as I did when I first discovered the affair a month ago. I have to admit, I was even impressed with my acting. 2 days after the money arrived, I immediately transferred it to another account. I invited Ollie and his wife to a nice dinner, ostensibly to thank Ari for supporting me when I needed help. He didn't need to know that this was actually my way of planting the seeds of revenge.